Platonic Lovers. I'm so excited because as we've been back and we've changed the way that the series kind of goes, I've had some of the most amazing human beings join me in conversations to talk about everything from the unique parts of their lives and their careers and how it impacts friendships. And it's kind of fun for me to have a podcast where I get to show and tell these amazing human beings in my life. Today, I have Dr. Sarah Bridges. She is somebody that I met through work a couple of years ago and has just become an incredible coach and mentor and friend. And I am just completely in awe of everything she does all the time. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And so today I want to introduce Sarah a little bit. She is a licensed psychologist, but really her claim to fame is not in the clinical work. She developed something called the Bridges Assessment, which is really an executive assessment tool where she gives people batteries of tests to help determine their fitness for different types of jobs and career changes. I mean, technically, people could just hire you to assess them, right? It doesn't have to be a company.
No, you can also do it for development, just to figure out more about yourself and what you might be doing.
Yeah, I love it. And so that's how I met Sarah, is I did one of these when I was bringing on new partners a couple years ago. And I just loved every part of the process, not just because I'm a mental health nerd too. And I loved like the battery of tests. And I just, brought me back to all of grad school and all of the different classes you take and learn all of that. But it really did give me a profound insight. I often will go back and look at my results for my Bridges assessment when I find myself stuck or when I feel like I'm ready to launch forward, or, one of the biggest things that's helped me is navigate my strengths and opportunities so that I challenge myself more. And, as therapists, we're like kind of obsessed with self-improvement. So it's one of the tools that I use to help gauge, that along with the stars and my friends and all of the other things. But it's definitely one of the things I have in my arsenal of support tools. So how did you, I want people to know a little bit about you. I think you are just like this amazing person. But if you want to just give us a rundown of who is Sarah Bridges?
Big question. Growing up, I was raised by a mother who was a Jungian analyst.
Oh, really?
And practiced quite a bit at the dinner table. So the one thing I was not going to be was a psychologist. And then my dad crossed over and got into it too. Went into college, and it wasn't until the third year, a lot of switched majors, that I took a psychology course and just fell in love with it.
So you're the kid of psychologists?
I am the kid of psychologists.
I
and
didn't
my
even know
sister
that.
is a psychologist at UC Berkeley. We're quite
It
a
runs
family.
deep. Yeah. So this is
runs
genetic.
Deep. It's genetic.
I love it.
It definitely is. So went through psychology, took a few years off, and then decided to go back for my PhD. And I went into the neuropsychology area. I had done some clinical work before, did a little bit after also, but was very interested in that realm. And through that got introduced to doing a lot of testing. Wasn't for workplace. It was for people. It was in a neurology clinic, people with brain injury and different things going on, but I really fell in love with what you could learn through that and apply it to helping people orient.
I love it. So you were doing all of that. What made you one of the things that you and I've talked about is when you're doing these assessments and really kind of creating just the Bridges assessment, it's so much more than a battery of tests. It's helping people find that passion and that vocation. What was that moment for you where you said, I want to go from, doing this in a neurology clinic to saying, I'm just kind of obsessed and passionate about this vocational path?
Yeah, the first time was, first of all, I was the only woman in my class, and I realized that all the men were working underground in the animal lab, and I was working with humans. So that might have been the first little signal. But actually, it was doing some contract work for my father, who was doing a lot of organizational change management work, and I just loved it, working one-on-one with people and teams. And got hooked. And out of that, joined a company called PDI that's now Korn Ferry.
Oh, yeah.
And that was where I really learned all the ropes on doing assessments and batteries and coaching people, which is a big part that follows assessment.
Because Korn Ferry, they're I know they do executive and recruitment. Do they also do personnel development and coaching and stuff like that?
They do now. They started in that realm.
Okay.
And that I wasn't part of it then. I came from a firm they acquired.
Sure.
And then started doing a lot of the kind of work I do.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
I love it. So
Yeah.
Is it weird to go from, what you think your career is going to be in kind of this space, especially having, you're one of the lucky people because at least you could see I want my psychology career to go this direction from my parents, but you can also be like, I definitely don't want it to go this direction from my parents, right? When you got into that space, like what was the thing that kind of sparked for you? Like whether was it the human connection? Was it you really like like a lot of therapists love to do long-term work. Others really like to do short-term work. Like, was there something for you that was like puzzle pieces clicking into place?
What I love about the assessment part of the work is two things: the human connection. I mean, it's deep, it's personal, it's vulnerable,
It
really
is.
talking. But there's also a very analytical piece, and I love that. A puzzle is a good analogy, figuring out what makes the person great at what they're doing, but also what can trip them up.
Yeah.
And then figuring out what we can do relative to that. Once I started working one-on-one with people, I loved it.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's such a good example of how, I tell everybody, sure, get a degree in being a therapist or in this field. You can do anything. A lot of people in my career, which you've gotten to see it for sure over the last few years, they're like, well, what do you like better, being an entrepreneur or therapist? I'm like, I don't think I could be good at either without both. Right. And so you can really take it any direction. So when you decided to start doing this kind of on your own, what gap were you trying to fill?
When I started my own business.
Yeah.
To be honest, you're giving me way too much credit. I had no business plan. I just had 4 kids, and I decided I was going to take some time off, and someone asked me to do a project. I really have come to believe that there's people who are great at building businesses through thorough planning, and they have the 5-year blah, blah, blah. And there's some of us who are very good at noticing what needs to be done and responding to opportunities, what might be called in research luck.
Yeah.
You're paying attention, then you're doing something. And I've always been much more the latter. So I didn't even know I was starting a business when I started. I just thought I was doing projects. Because I'd been home just for 4 months with the kids, and my middle son said, Mom, you need to go analyze someone else. So that was the sign. I got the heave-ho from my children.
Classic, yes.
Classic. And then it just started and kind of snowballed from there. And here we are 24 years later.
Isn't that funny how that's such a cliche therapist answer too? Like you started a business by accident.
But it's totally true for me.
Same. I didn't have a business plan. And now that I've taken, I have a certificate from Harvard in organizational leadership because I'm like, hey, I have a pretty big company now. I should probably get some sort of formal training. And what I've learned is that people, like there's 2 kinds of successful business owners. The kind who are passionate about business, meaning they will try 100 different things until they find one that sticks, and they create business plans and 5-year plans and P&Ls and analytics. And then there's people who are just really excited and good at what they do. And then, I always describe them a little bit like a frog in a pot. 10 years later, my business was huge and has hundreds of locations across the country. And people always ask me this question, well, you must be so proud. And I'm like, I feel like an idiot because I'm like, well, I was just doing what I thought I was supposed to,
That is so funny. And not operating off the 5-year plan.
Yeah, it's not, but that's the same for you. Like you're saying, I just kind of started doing this. It felt right. So I started growing it and I kind of learned along the way. And here I am, and I get to do this incredible work with these huge companies and these impressive human beings. And, that's just not how it was intended to go. And I often describe to people that kind of entrepreneurship is genetically ingrained in who we are as people. It is that balance of that right brain, that left brain. And I even think for therapists, we're taught to be curious. If all else fails, just be curious. Ask questions of things you want to know about somebody else and you can't go wrong. And I think that's hard. We pay attention, we observe, and then we're curious. So it's like, well, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to do that way. What if I did? Or what if I do this? And you don't even realize how much time has passed and how much success you've done. Or, you if you're anything like me, you're certainly hard on yourself for all of the things you wish you could have done differently and the mistakes. But it's sometimes hard to draw that line in the sand of like, look what I've accomplished.
Well, it's the whole Kierkegaard quote, you can only live life forward and understand it backwards. I've probably botched that, but
I've never even heard that.
Yeah, it seems so clear backwards. And I have, when I work with people in coaching, I should have, or I could have done this. It wasn't obvious going forward.
Yeah.
It wasn't obvious.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. So switching gears a little bit and talking about the actual work you do with people, I think one of the things that my listeners would want to know the most about, kind of even in this like therapist-y context and friendship context, is what are the most common challenges that people face when changing roles and careers? Like, what's it really?
There's a lot of answers I could give to that. The first one that came to my mind is that many people keep on some level trying to do what they've done before as they assume the new duties. And so they get a bit burned out, they bottleneck, they have trouble rising up. And it's so understandable from the level of the brain. We prioritize familiar things because they're safe. And new role, we might be told be strategic. That is so amorphous. So unless someone has really figured out what that means for me to behave strategically, we tend to lapse into still doing things a level below and block the whole thing.
I'm still stuck on this word you said. What did you say?
Which word?
The amorphous?
Amorphous.
Like changing, growing? Okay.
Kind of vague.
Vague. Okay. I've never heard it before. I'm like, God, Sarah's so smart. I just want to absorb everything you say and do. And by the way, she is wearing the cutest hot pink blazer and I'm obsessed. She is a mentor in more ways than just entrepreneurship, but also in fashion. And I appreciate how much you rock a good pink outfit.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So when people are, so you talk about this people don't know how to quantify or qualify these things about them that make them good at what they do. But kind of like what we just talked about, a lot of people just fall into a career. I mean, even people who go to school and get a degree in marketing, or let's just talk about psychology. It's like the most popular major that people fall into and don't get a job in that field. And they kind of just evolve. And then all of a sudden, maybe they're a decade into professional work experience and now they're analyzing loans at a bank and they're like, I don't know how this happened. Mm-hmm. So then they come to you and they want to, maybe they think they want to be a leader or people leadership, but sometimes they just think that's the next checkbox. Kind of like when you get out of college, you get married, you have kids. It's like the next job in my career is that I have to become a manager, an associate director, and a senior director, and a VP, and do all of these things. But part of your assessment process kind of peels back the layers of that and says, but like, why? Like, what are the things about you that make you good or bad at that?
Definitely. And I think the motives why you want to is exactly right. I mean, it reminds me of people saying, I want a lot of money. And you could assume just for material reasons, same. But if you peel it back, what does that mean to you? I mean, for some people, it's safety or choice or autonomy. It can mean so many things. And I think with careers, you're right. Many people get stuck on a track that to be successful or keep growing, they need to go up. And they're often very unhappy in what they're doing. And instead to pause and really get clear on what they love. I'm a realist. You need to pay your mortgage.
Totally.
Definitely. But there often, even within an organization, are ways laterally we can move, or we could start, doing some cross-functional projects that get us exposed. It's always a lot easier to move within an organization where you've established a reputation than to try to just go on the open marketplace and say, here I am.
Do you feel like more people nowadays are kind of wanting to be more like radical? Like they're just kind of like, yeah, I've done this for 20 years and now I just want to do, I was an analyst for a big company and now I want to be a performer in the arts. Like, do you see more people who want to do these kind of dramatic career changes these days?
I would definitely say I see more people. I wouldn't call it radical yet. I see more coming up through the younger generation. So I would assume, just even to be thinking in that way.
Yeah.
A lot of people create cages in terms of what's possible, and they've created them, and I'm not blaming the victim. They're stuck in them. But there really is more possible that they could think about. But I'll give you an example. I worked with a hedge fund guy, and it was a guy, very wealthy, just on the treadmill, doing. Finally got sick of it.
Yeah.
Today, he's a 6th grade science teacher.
Shut up.
No, he is.
I love that.
And when I checked in with him, happier than he's ever been.
That's amazing.
I know. And so I definitely do see these second career pieces.
Yeah. I'm just curious, in that situation, and I think that's what's hard. Like you said, he was wealthy. Like that's privilege. Like if I'm a 6th grade teacher, I don't have the ability to just say, I'm going to be a hedge fund manager now.
That and conversely, I can't necessarily say I'm going to just go find myself and it might fail.
Yes.
That is, and I think that's such a legitimate complaint. It seems always to be wealthy people who've made tons of money and now they're doing their dream.
Yeah.
But I have seen people make all kinds of switches. It takes planning. You don't get to do it impulsively. When we're grown-ups, we have a lot of obligations.
Yeah.
But I've seen all kinds of switches, including going back to school at night while they work. And
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like that's kind of like the new American dream is like finding, settling into what you need to pay the bills or following in your parents' footsteps or kind of, and for sure these last 30 years, I mean, I saw my mom go back to school and get her master's degree when I was in high school. And I feel like maybe there's more people just choosing to do that, saying, well, I can, even especially in mental health. There's a lot of people who are like, I call them like recovered from the corporate world and deciding to go into mental health. It's harder than it looks to be good at this job. But I love that it's pretty inclusive and gives any willing person who wants to try a chance to. But I think it's kind of fascinating. I'm a millennial, and whether that's good or bad is for the individual to decide. But my generation gets a bad rap of like, oh, we're entitled and we just want to do this. And I certainly know those people who think like I can just quit my job and I don't have to worry about this or somebody will rescue me or all of that. But I have also seen some of the hardest working people come out of my generation of people. And I mean, I don't know. What's your take on that? Do you feel like that's pretty consistent across the different generations of people you've worked with, it kind of balances itself out?
I really do. I mean, I know we always love to talk generations. They did in the 50s and 60s and 20s. And there's an element of an older generation looking at a younger one and rolling our eyes and wringing our hands.
Shaking our finger. Back in my day.
And I really do believe generations are shaped by environmental things going on. If there's a world war or, whatever. Yes, they are shaped by that. COVID is a recent example. I'm not convinced generations are that different. I certainly know what we're talking about with millennials who get a bad rap. And I've employed a bunch that work so hard, I worry about them overworking.
Right.
So
it's funny because my kids are Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha.
That's what I'm pretty sure they're called. It was Gen Z is after millennial and now it's Gen Alpha. So we've started over. And, they talk in all this stupid little language. And I don't know if you're around any Gen Alpha people these days, but bless your heart because they say things like, that's some skibbity Ohio Riz. And everyone who's my age is like so quick to do that. Like,
yes.
And I'm like, you guys, we used to say the same dumb stuff. And so I'm like you. I actually, people talk about the political polarity and I'm like, this is not different than what it was when my dad was a kid and he was going to get drafted into a war. Like that was a very polarized time. And we were talking about putting our kids into, death traps. And so I agree. I think that it's just people.
I think it's very human nature to look for those differences. And when we get to a different point in life, like older, to look down on younger people and not forget what I was like at that age or people around me were like. It's very hard to keep that perspective.
Yeah.
And being a therapist, people tend to edit the way they look back at what they've done.
Yeah, and it's so hard for me too because, and again, I always put out there that being in 40 hours a week of therapy, even if I'm the person who's directing the session, I'm learning a lot about myself. Like it's impossible to be in that space with humans and that vulnerability. And a lot of therapy, even if you have the best intention or theory you're using, you're still kind of piecing together these synapses on the fly. And so you're creating neural connections too. It's not just the person in front of you. And so you learn a lot. And I think one of the things that comes with that is that I don't have that same capacity of judging people, and so people across these different generations and, or like, for example, I'll bring it back cause I went way here cause ADHD, right? Like that's my personal brand. But I believe I think it was Jane Goodall. Look at me. I'm going to fudge this quote, but like leave the world better than you inherited it. And so like a lot of things that come up in just pop culture and conversation or even in the workplace around like paid maternity leave, I didn't have it, but I would love for people to have it. And, so I don't look back and say, well, I didn't get it or rewrite my past. And I credit that I have been forced to look at my worldview differently because of being a therapist and just kind of, comparing and contrasting. But I think it's interesting. And I would imagine that all the people you might see probably show up to like learn so much about themselves from this assessment.
I think they do. I mean, what's interesting to me is often it's not, oh my God, I thought I was an extrovert and I'm an introvert. What I really notice with people is we know we have traits, but we don't always have a relative sense of them. So
Yeah.
when you look at testing and see, I'll give you my own example.
Yeah.
I took testing and I see my independence score and it's at the 99th percentile. And I thought, back when I worked in an organization, I got feedback. I didn't always communicate enough. I kind of shot off and did things. And it was an epiphany for me to realize I knew I was high and independent, but pretty much everyone I meet is lower on that.
Yeah.
And so any trait where we're higher or lower, it's really good to know we're going to have a prediction error. We're going to overestimate it, underestimate it. And then the other thing is, of course, in the assessment, there's one test we use on our backup style. It's the Hogan test. It's not if you have a backup style, it's what's your flavor. Everybody has them.
Mm-hmm.
So the differentiator is not pretending I don't have them. That's a different kind of problem we see in the assessment. It's being aware of it and having a way you manage it. And managing it might be a trusted person who gives you feedback when you're in it.
Yeah.
And you can pull back out of it and make amends if you need to, whatever the case be.
So it like qualifies the traits you know about yourself and gives you a tool to help you sort it out. I was just talking to Sarah before we got on here that when I did my Bridges assessment, it was all pretty much spot on for my personality. Like I came out as like strong as a CEO, great at collaboration. You know, I was kind of in the middle on the independence. Like I want a team, you know, and all those types of things. But there's this one test that you do that talks about your different thinking styles. And one is like critical thinking and strategic thinking. And she's like, Erin, the only thing about your scores that kind of, you know, are unique or something I don't see very often is that your strategic thinking was like really low and your critical thinking was really high, or maybe it was the opposite. I don't remember. And I was like, weird. And then I remembered that those tests. So Erin, I didn't realize how intense these tests were. I'm a mom of like a gajillion children, right? And I'm just kind of on the fly, running a business, doing all these things. Well, I thought these were like things I could fill out on my phone. And so I told Sarah afterwards, I'm like, so I think the reason why my tests in these scores were so opposite is because I was sitting in my kitchen with my kids running by me, helping them make dinner and doing all this stuff. And then I realized that I need to focus and pay attention. And so Sarah's like, oh my gosh, that's so funny. Do you want to retake it? And I'm like, you know what? I think I learned what I needed to learn, which is that I can't be strategically thinking if I'm not focused. And so it's just like that. It's that self-awareness. It's that piece of like, I could retake it and find out what I actually score on strategic thinking, but I was able to have enough awareness to be like, it doesn't matter how well I score or don't. I scored great on the critical thinking because I took the time to focus on it. And as somebody who has ADHD, like that kind of told me what I needed to know. Whether I'm a strategic thinker or not, cool. But if I'm not focused on anything, and I've learned that in my career, that in these last few years, if I don't put time on my calendar to do quiet work, you know, and like really minimize, you know, Brad, who always sits with me, sometimes he likes to listen to music and he'll look at me and be like, are we listening to like calm music or are we listening to like girly bitchy music today? And I'm like, if there's words, I can't focus. And I think about that test and that moment all the time because A, it's funny, but B, it still taught me what I needed to know about any part of how I work. So it's just been so cool. I'm obsessed with Sarah Bridges and the assessment. So I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about, so this is Platonic Lovers podcast. We talk about friends. One of the things that I am obsessed with in the workplace is workplace friendships. But moreover, like we talk about our workplace gossip and spilling the tea, and we go to happy hours and we do all this stuff, and that's great. However, I don't think we talk enough about how much our friends influence our career choice. You know, like I think when you go out for wine with the girlfriends, you might be bitching about a husband or your kids or all of this. And maybe you talk about a work project and maybe you don't. But I think in my experience, I see a lot of more passive influence from our friend group in our vocation. Do you see that too?
Yeah. Say more on what you see with the passive influence.
Yeah. So, you know, like, our friends ask us questions about our job, but then it kind of gets minimized. It's like, oh, how was work this week? Oh, it was hard. It was tough. If you're not very intentional about having conversations with your friend about work, it kind of gets thrown on the back burner. And so in that context, it's kind of like work isn't important, you know, but we know it's important. And so I think in certain friendships, I kind of want your take on like, is it important to talk to your friends about your work or find that group of people? And do you think it's appropriate that it's the people who also work with you because there's that built-in validation, or like, what is your experience on, or like just even influence? Like friends, as we're older, we might become more independent in how we think, but we know like a huge predictor of risk factors for kids is who they spend time with, right? If I'm hanging out with my girlfriends who are doing this or who don't take work seriously, or maybe they're stay-at-home moms or whatever, like I see that show up in friendship. Like when people come to therapy and they want to bitch about their friends, it doesn't usually come down to husband relations. It comes down to like lifestyle differences related to their job, but yet they don't talk about it.
That is super interesting. I mean, the ideal to me is having a close friend who shares your vocational interests, because if we're lucky enough to be doing something that's tied to our values and we love, I'm not talking about I'm doing something to punch the clock. There's nothing more intimate than sharing that with a friend who also has it.
Yep.
For instance, my best friend from college is also a psychologist. She lives in New York, far away, still best friends. And being able to talk about work to each other is just another way we connect deeply. She's really smart. It's really interesting to talk with her about that. With work, I mean, I think about being very close with a particular person I work with, Madeline, and we talk very deeply about work. Now, I can absolutely see bringing in a friend. There's an element of unknown how that's going to work within an organization. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. Because one of the things that I didn't know in my by accident career that ended up being fairly successful is, and I remembered it distinctly when Ellie was growing and I was married to my ex-husband, and he was like, Erin, you can't just hire all your friends. Like this was a conversation in our kitchen. I was like, yeah, I started the business. I can do whatever I want, right? And he was like, no. And what took me another 7 years to realize is that what I heard was hire therapists who aren't just like you, because there's other people who need therapy who aren't like you. And I was like, oh yeah, let's diversify. Let's bring in a whole bunch of other people who I don't know, because there's the right fit for everyone. What I realized later on he was trying to say was like a perspective of somebody who's willing to challenge you differently than friends will.
Some friends will challenge you differently, but you are right. I think it's very common if the friendship and then their profession becomes a dual relationship. That's tricky. I mean, it really is, and I've seen it go awry many times, whether it's family businesses or friendships. I've also seen it work, so I don't have a black and white opinion on it. But I think that we do need to set up some guardrails to make sure that we're not living in a bubble if we're surrounded by friends and not getting feedback up in some way, or having that truth teller friend who will keep you real.
Oh, I got plenty of those. Brad will always keep it real and tell me what's going on.
That's good.
You know, I haven't even had Brad on the podcast yet. I know I'm going to have to, because he runs this whole thing. He sits in this room and giggles when I call him out. And it reminds me of Deadpool when you break the fourth wall and he like looked directly at the camera, because he's just sitting there giggling, and it's so cute and it's so funny. But I agree with you. And I think that's something I get, I get along really well with my ex-husband, and that's something that other people can't find they can't wrap their head around. And I think it's because it's that discomfort of like, I don't think I could do it. My older sister has told me, she's like, Erin, you've been a stepmom twice. And she's like, I don't even think my personality would allow me to do that once, just because, and it's like super hyper aware. But I think it's the same about working with your friends. Like you either can or you can't. And luckily for us, most of the friends I work with are therapists. So we are probably on the extreme opposite end of like, sometimes we need to like not psychoanalyze each other and call each other out on our flaws and all of that stuff. But it also, I read something today that says like, if you can have a friend that is like brutally honest with you, those friendships are closer and tighter, and provide like a reduction in physical health issues over years, like a protective factor for later on risk, which we know studies on loneliness and just connection, but truly that like real raw friendship. And I think a lot of people minimize the friendships that they make at work.
Oh my gosh, I think they're so important. You even in terms of work satisfaction, it's so embedded with friendship that we can't really separate it. Having a very close friend at work and loving your job tend to be really entwined for people.
Yeah. Well, it does. And it almost makes me wonder, like, I don't, when I mean, I do work with my friends, but we're going to go with the traditional story. Most people I know who I don't work with don't really hang out with their coworkers outside of work. Why do you think it's like because we're told you don't want to mix like home and work?
Kind of a church and state thing.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. I don't know. I've always been one of those people who hung out with my work friends. I am not sure on that. I think a lot of people do have an idea you keep them separate, but I think it's a bit of a false premise because you're in both scenarios. It's you.
Right. Like just bring
It's
your whole
you.
self.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, maybe something to pay attention to in some of the questions that you ask all of these people and the coaching and all that stuff. And I think it's interesting because you said, you have these deep friendships with people that you work with. One of the reasons why I am obsessed with you and have you as one of my mentors and coaches is because I don't also have a lot of friends who have similar experience to me. Whether it's the difficulties in growing my career or deciding to bring on investors and all of this other stuff, like it can be very lonely in sometimes these positions. I'm guessing you probably see that in a lot of the people that you work with.
That is such a common denominator, and I know it's sort of a dumb saying. It's lonely at the top. When I work with CEOs, it's lonely at the top. And for a number of reasons, you become more, especially if suddenly you rose up to that. I mean, you founded your business, but if someone rises up to it, suddenly all the people you hung out with or, talked about stuff at work or problems or anything else, you can't do that in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, whether you like it or not, we humans are wired unconsciously to be aware of status. And suddenly you are higher in the order. People are just aware of that.
They are. And again, it's something, I'm a deeply, I care more about people than anything. Call it my strength or my blessing or my curse, right? I think it's more of a blessing than a curse because it pushes me to be innovative to make sure I can always keep people at the top. Well, also, I love business. I love business. I love the problem solving, the strategy, how to make money. I love all of it, right? It's so fun. But I think that does matter because even though, like to your point, I started my own business with some of my best friends, at every stage of the company getting bigger, you believe people are honest with you. And there are certainly employees I've had who will give me like the rawest, most honest feedback. But then you also question yourself, like, were they just telling me what I wanted to hear? And so I think that is also hard for and I'll just throw it out there for any executives who are listening to my podcast that there's, hiring a coach or getting a mentor is one of the healthiest things you can do for yourself because it's almost like the same way that when you bring on a therapist, you can spend an hour a week any way you want. And if you can have somebody who can validate that experience for you. I mean, it's no wonder that therapists often like to work with people who have similarities to them and vice versa. It's that built-in empathy. You don't have to pretend to try and find it or I can still provide empathy for people I don't have the same situation for, but it certainly makes it easier. But I think that's hard at work. And I imagine that for how many executives you tend to work with, that's got to be a pretty common theme.
It's really common, and part of coaching is doing confidential interviews, often with people around the person. And I will tell you, I have had people get brutally difficult feedback in terms of their style and how they're landing on people, and had, C-level people crying at the table. And the comment is, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So they cared.
Yeah.
They cared and cared to shift that, but people are not reporting it up. And I don't think, yes, there's a piece of it's hard for us humans and especially Midwesterners to give the direct feedback. But I also think we can't underestimate the status piece. And people don't tend to give really straight feedback up. It's more unusual if they do.
Yeah.
And so having some way that individuals can give that confidentially, just so you don't get in your own way with the blind spot. You're trying to do A and it's landing as B.
So that's super interesting because unpopular opinion of mine as a therapist is that I actually it's gone back and forth. At Ellie, we had periods of time where we took anonymous feedback. It was called like the Ellie Unicorn Idea Box, where people could suggest anything. Therapy culture is therapists will say anything. I mean, they will not hold back. And so what I found is that people were putting anonymous things in there that were maybe an opinion of one, and then it was trickling throughout the organization. And I'm like, if we're therapists and we're going to call it this obtusely, like, let's work together on a solution. And so for a long time, and that's an interesting perspective because I haven't thought about it the way you just shared of like, don't have blind spots and people not telling you. But I also struggle with the lack of accountability. Like if you're going to put that information out there and or somebody has an experience, like I want to be able to address it and go after it and get deeper and layer so like we can really fix it. But if I don't know who or the reason, or like, let's talk about the taboo topic of like crappy employees who just float things out there where it's like, I need to know if this is an opinion of the masses or if this is an opinion of one. And is this somebody that I highly respect, or is this somebody that, I'm coaching out?
It's such a great point, and I should have run the line all the way through. Once I've done 10 or 12 interviews, I collated, and we only give themes and quotes that were multiple people, so half or more. So it's not the hit and run person who's giving one point of view, but where 8 out of 12 people have said some variation on, I want you to speak up more, you have great things to say, but we just don't hear from you enough.
Yeah.
That was a recent one. I will put it in there and talk about it. If it's a style thing, also say, and I always assume there's such a big difference between intent and impact, and you know that as a therapist. We know in our heads what we mean to be doing, and we assume everybody else sees it that way, and they often don't. But in one way, that's not bad. It's a communication issue. It's framing it, it's whatever, exploring it. So we look, and when we get multiple comments that roll up to a theme, we share those themes.
Yeah.
We're not just taking any axe to grind.
Yeah. I think that's hard. I think a lot of people in the workplace underestimate, the value of getting that feedback. We used to hold open feedback sessions where people would come, and we'd do them hours and back to back and really want to understand what the people cared about. Because again, people first business, like you can't be in a mental health business and not care about the people. And I think that's fascinating and interesting. I've always been kind of like overly obsessed with feedback. And I will never forget one of the best pieces of feedback that I got in the masses early on. I had probably 25 employees at the time. We used to sit in St. Paul in my old office, and we'd order like Mexican food in for lunch, and we'd just kind of do like a monthly meeting. And over the course of probably the previous few weeks, I was asking people about topics and ideas, and 3 people, they said it to me very differently. Like I couldn't have probably collected at that time that they had spoken to each other. And to this day, I don't know if they had, but I'm an ideas person. Before you sat down, I'm like, look at my invention. Let's do this. Look at all these things I'm doing, right? Like I have 1,000 ideas for every minute in the day, and I am excited about it. I actually did I had to introduce, I was sponsoring a fundraiser yesterday, and I talked about how like, hi, it's me. I'm still here. I'm like glitter after Christmas. Oh, surprised to be seeing me, but also a little bit too enthusiastic, right? About everything. But the best piece of feedback I got was like, Erin, we love your energy and we love all of your ideas, but like sometimes we don't know if these are things we're actually doing or if these are just in at the idea stage. And I was blown away. I loved getting that feedback because I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think for a second, like half of the things I say out loud, we're not going to do. I'm just a dreamer. I just put it out in the universe. And so that was probably my first moment as a leader where I had to learn that you can't just be Erin in every part of the organization, because people do want goals. They do want to know what's real and what's not real. And that's why you have to develop teams of people who are strategic and who want to be in that innovation space, because to a lot of other people who are just trying to get their job done or in a more critical space, they want to be told, and so it is so powerful to get that feedback and to learn those things. And I'm glad to know that you do that in those feedback and evaluation sessions, because you kind of like, you're talking like a 360 kind of thing.
Yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So, before we wrap up here, I want to ask a couple of questions of you about like, you do these assessments where you can kind of help find people's strengths and opportunities. We don't say weaknesses anymore.
That's right.
It's an opportunity. God, I just love talking to the microphone. What parts of your career, even though, you kind of fell upon this entrepreneurship journey, like where are some of your biggest learning moments? Where were some of your biggest opportunities where you're like, we talk about most people fail, right? 80% of people fail at their ideas and all that kind of stuff. Like what was some of those big moments for you?
Well, there have been several. I mean, my biggest moment of nearly failing was personally induced. It wasn't the economy or the housing crisis. So after I'd been sober for 20 years, I was going through a divorce and started drinking again. I mean, just
Totally.
fell apart
Yeah.
and had been an alcoholic. I'd been sober 20 years. It's one thing to get sober once. To get sober a second time is a whole different animal because of being aware. I did it before. I have kids. I have a business. Just the shame element of it can really keep you locked in the cycle. I ended up needing to pause my business, and I told clients I'm going into rehab, the
Yeah.
ones that I knew
Good
well.
for you.
No, I did. And I went away and I was offline for 8 months. Not that I was in rehab that whole time, but just really felt like I need to do a reboot here. Pulled money out of my 401k. I mean, the whole
thing.
bit. And had no clue, even reputation wise, how it would be when I came back out. And I said, well, I know how to do this. I built it back 7 years ago. I can do this again. And did it again.
Yeah.
And it impacted my work so deeply just when occasionally I'll have clients say, you don't know how hard it is to change a habit. It's like, I kind of do.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a few memories. But it also shifts your empathy. I mean, knowing that any of us, and there's all different ways we get stuck in something. Man, I understand that. I really understand that and what works and what doesn't work. But that was probably the hardest point, was a personally induced one. I mean, there have been difficult times, the economy, all these different things. But I don't know. I think my own experience with getting sober puts everything in perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you care if we talk about that a little bit?
Not in the least.
I also, like, you're just such a dimensional human being, and I love so much about you that I totally even forgot about that bit. And I think it's powerful. And not that I was going to go this direction, and maybe this is another podcast, but I think it's very empowering for people to hear that there are people who are professionals who have to go through that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, and it happens more than people talk about. And the only way to reduce the stigma is to talk about it. I love that that's been a part of your journey. How long have you been sober now?
Since 2008.
I'm bad at math. How many years is it? 16?
That is now 17 years.
Congratulations. That's amazing. And Sarah also has like a farm and like rescues animals and dogs. Like she's living in an alternate version of my dream.
It's definitely my dream. It's really fun. It's a farm in Lakeville, and as my middle son said, not a working animal in the place. It's all rescue animals, horses and dogs, and
it's just the best. It's
yeah.
the best. So, at this stage of your career, what do you feel like, I mean, you shared, getting sober and going to rehab and starting over essentially was a huge catalyst. What are you most proud of?
Oh my gosh. I am most proud at this point of the team that has come to be part of my business. That and launching my children. But the team just added this dimension that's so incredible. We happen to be all women. We work very tightly together, and I just love it.
That's so great. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Coming on the podcast. I don't know how often you do this, but I'm really grateful you chose to do it with me. I can't wait for more. I can't wait for people that we're going to get questions. And so I might follow up with you with some questions.
Anytime.
Yes, please make sure that you guys, it'll be in the link in the post, but please send us questions if you have them. Sarah's absolutely fascinating. If you haven't done a Bridges assessment or want to work on development or just find yourself needing to talk to a really kick-ass lady, please talk to my friend Sarah. She's just incredible. And now it's the weekend.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! All right. See you next time.
Bye.